we will get started. So I'll start by saying thank you to all of you who are here. Thank you, of course, to Steve, who I'll say more about in a moment. But we know it's either the end of the school day or the middle of the school day for some of you, or if you're watching the recording, either way, you're taking time out of your day to be here with us and to think a little bit about writing instruction, and we appreciate that. A little bit about myself. So my name is Sherry Lefkowitz. I'm the Senior Director of the Writing Pathway here at Teaching Labs Studio. Started my career as a high school English teacher for many years in the Bronx, New York. And since then have been at a number of different nonprofits, pretty much always focused on writing instruction. That is something that I am really passionate about. Once a long time ago wanted to be a writer, and now want to help other people become good writers and successful writers. We also have Phil here today. I'll let him briefly introduce himself, and then I'll introduce Steve. Go ahead, Phil.
I am Phil Weinberg. I am fortunate to work with Sherry on the writing pathway after a long career I had in the New York City Department of Ed, where I was a teacher, principal, and eventually the Deputy Chancellor for Teaching and Learning. It's great to be here today.
Thanks, Phil. And I did see, thank you so much, Janique and Angel, for letting me know about the chat. If you want to try it out, it should be working now. Let's just change that one as well. Okay, should be accessible to everyone. Thank you so much for letting me know about that. Okay, so let me introduce the one and only Dr. Steve Graham. So Dr. Steve Graham is a Regents and the Warner Professor in the Division of Leadership and Innovation in Teachers College, and the recipient of the Barry J. Zimmerman Award for outstanding contributions to the fields of studying and self-regulated learning research. For 42 years, he has studied how writing develops, how to teach it effectively, and how writing can be used to support reading and learning. Recently, he's been involved in the development and testing of digital tools for supporting writing and reading, and his research typically involves developing writers and students with special needs in both elementary and secondary schools, with much occurring in urban classrooms. And he's received numerous awards for his contributions to literacy, in particular being selected to the Reading Hall of Fame in 2018. He's also a fellow of the American Educational Research Association and Division 15 of the American Psychological Association and of the International Academy for Research in Learning Disabilities. Steve, it is such a privilege to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, especially since you're not feeling at your best today in particular. We are really grateful to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we are going to do a few things today. So mostly we're going to spend our time talking with Steve, as that is the very special reason for this event. But we are going to start by just briefly looking at the Writing Pathway, which is the platform that was created as a result of our work with Steve, and that is the Writing Pathway platform. So some of our discussion today will include a little bit about the pathway and its evolution. So we'd like you to have that point of reference to see what it is we're talking about. And our goal today is to have a rich, thought-provoking discussion really around what we can do better when it comes to teaching writing, what we've learned about teaching writing. Again, most of the discussion will be time with Steve, but we do have 15 minutes reserved at the end for your questions. And this is important. Please put your questions in the Q&A and feel free to put them in anytime during the webinar. So if you've come here already with a burning question, please feel free to go ahead and put it in there. If you put a question into your registration, we do have those questions, but if you want to put it in again to make sure it gets seen, that is totally fine. And again, feel free to put those in there anytime during the session. Ideally, do not put the questions for Steve or for me in the chat, just because we'll be looking primarily at the Q&A for those questions. But feel free to use the chat as a water cooler and to talk to each other and to get to know who's here and to comment. All of that is totally welcome. Okay, so a quick little overview of the Writing Pathway. So what is the Writing Pathway? It is a free scope and sequence for teaching writing that can be used in any content area, grades 3 through 12. And what's really special about the pathway is it comes with AI embedded throughout that enables teachers to create practice for students in the content that they're teaching. So whatever that content is, whether it's ELA, social studies, science, any content, teachers can really quite instantly create practice for students that is both in their content and teaching them the writing skills that they so much need help with. The pathway is organized into 5 categories. So the first 2 focus on sentence level skills, including grammar. We think the sentence is really important and kind of under-leveraged as a tool for learning. And then the other 3 categories are dedicated to the key writing genres that students are expected to practice and master in school. And that would be informational writing, persuasive and argumentative writing, including research papers, and narrative. And within each of these categories, there are several modules. So for the paragraph and more categories, each of those begins at the paragraph level and then progresses step by step to longer forms of writing, going skill by skill. One of the hallmarks, I would say, of the pathway is that it is a very scaffolded, carefully sequenced pathway for teaching writing. And it's not just comprehensive. We hope it's also very easy to use. So with its AI-powered tools, again, you can generate practice tailored to your content, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So let's go to the website at this point, which is right here, and it is just writingpathway.org if you want to check it out. And when you come to the homepage, there's that little overview that we just went through of how the pathway is organized. And then you'll see at the bottom the free materials generator, and this is where the AI comes in. And what you have here is basically a sampler of some of the skills in the pathway, and you can practice and see what it's like to generate materials with the AI. But I'm actually going to bring us to the full skill library, which this is pulling from, and go right here. So here's the skills library. And as you can see, those categories are all here. And we're going to take a look at 2 activities. The first one we're going to look at is in complex sentences and in joining words. So as you can see, there are, I think there's 14 skills under the category of joining words. And let's take a look at subordinating conjunctions mixed practice. So this is where students are working with multiple different subordinating conjunctions. And we hope in the content that they're learning. So what you have here is a worksheet that is already created so that you get a sense as the teacher of what you're creating. So here we have some sentences about a novel, and we see students are given a sentence stem that begins with one of those conjunctions, and then they're completing it. And we also have at the bottom, very importantly, an answer key for you as the teacher to be able to evaluate what your students are writing. And we also have below that some recommendations, just kind of a general recommendation for how you might introduce this skill, how you might do this with students in the classroom. Now, here's where it gets exciting. So I'm going to go back up to the top here. And I'm going to say, well, I teach 7th grade, but my students are really at more of a 6th grade reading level. And we're reading A Long Walk to Water. Just finished chapter 3. And I would like my students to do some practice with this skill in that content. And off the purple dots go. And while this generates, I'll make a note that I think is quite important about us, especially given that this is an AI tool. And that is that our tool is entirely teacher-facing. So at no point do students log in. They don't create accounts. There is no student data in the platform whatsoever. It is an entirely teacher-facing tool. And that means that you as the teacher are the final decider of what goes in front of your students, which we think is really, really critical. Especially with AI. So now we can see that we've gotten some practice with those same conjunctions, but now in the content that my students are learning. So they're reading about Salva and A Long Walk to Water, and now they can complete these sentence stems in that content. And I've got my answer key as well to help me evaluate this. So that's what that looks like at the sentence level. I also want to show you one of the skills for one of the modules in the paragraphs and more section. So let's say we go to writing to persuade or argue. This very first module, paragraph with paraphrased evidence. You can see there are just 7 skills here. And the idea would be that each of these is a lesson, but of course you could spend more or less time on some of these or repeat them as needed. So let's take a look at this first lesson. So all of the modules within the paragraphs and more section, they all begin the same way. They all begin with having students study a mentor text. We know from the research that this is a really valuable practice for students to really get a sense of where am I going in this unit? I'm expected to do this writing. What does that look like when it's successful? I know this is something that I, as a teacher, wish I had done more of. I think that using of a model text can be so helpful and so much more helpful than just instructions about what to do, right? So here we have a model, and this one is about the Revolutionary War. And students are asked to read that paragraph and then do a little deconstruction of the paragraph. So how is each of the sentences, including the transitions, functioning in that paragraph? And really help them to kind of pull back the curtain on that writing. And then in your answer key, of course, you get that description of how each of those is functioning. And again, here's where the magic happens. I can come over here and say, well, I teach 7th grade and I teach social studies, and we're learning about the Industrial Revolution, specifically the effects of the Industrial Revolution. And I can generate now a mentor paragraph for my students that will show them what that strong writing looks like, but it's going to be about the content that they're learning. Or maybe this is a topic that we just finished, and I want this to serve as a review for them of that content. This one taking a tiny bit longer to think through this. We can come back to it. And while it's doing that, I'll point out some other things. So I didn't use these 2 optional options here, but you do have these as well, which is to upload. So you can upload, let's say, a worksheet you've used in the past or a text. If you feel like the AI is not as familiar with whatever text you're studying and you want to upload the text itself, you can do that. And then very importantly, and really amazingly, you can enter any language here and have it translated. We actually just got an email last week from someone in Mumbai telling us that she was amazed that the pathway worked in Hindi. And she said it really still did a pretty excellent job with the translation in Hindi. So that was pretty neat to hear. So yes, so you can go in and do that as well. Okay, now we've got our mentor paragraph. So let's check it out. So we've got the prompt that the student was responding to, and we've got a paragraph about the Industrial Revolution written at a 7th grade reading level, and then that deconstruction for students to do, as well as that answer key. And with that, I'm going to pause our demo. There's lots more I could show you. I highly encourage you to check it out yourself. If I haven't mentioned it, this resource is entirely free. All of the AI is entirely free. So please do explore. Okay, and then because we do have Steve here today, I also want to give you a little bit of context for our work together and the research that we've done, that we've had the privilege to do with Steve. So from the beginning with the Writing Pathway, we've been really dedicated to working very closely with teachers to both design and to test this pathway. And that's something really important to us because it's one thing to be research-based, it's another to be research-proven. And so that is something that we've been trying to do. We've been trying to do both of these things from the beginning. So we started with a daily survey of writing instruction with about 100 teachers across the country filling that survey out every single day, reporting on their writing instruction habits. And we were hoping to get a business as usual take on what does writing look like in America right now. And then the year after that, and the year after that, which were the 23 and 24 school years, we worked with both treatment and control schools, over 50 teachers across the country, over 1,000 students across the country, grades 7 through 10. Some of those teachers, I believe, are here today, actually, which is very exciting. And from that research, we hope to publish our analysis of those results soon. We're going to be specifically looking at the middle grades, as that's where we saw the greatest impact and fidelity. And what were those results? So in the first year, middle school pathway classrooms made an average of 3.08 times more growth than the control group with an effect size of 0.21. And in the second year, which is the data you see on the screen, middle school classrooms made an average of 9.3 times more growth than the control group students with an effect size of 0.64. And while students in the control classrooms actually on average declined, by 0.3 points on average, students in pathway classrooms improved by 2.4 points on average, and that's on a 24-point scale. So we're really excited about this data as it means that the pathway is having an impact. And as Steve can attest, it can be hard to move the needle when it comes to writing, so we're really proud of these results. Speaking of Steve, let's move now to our discussion. So Steve, if you are ready, we have our first question for you.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, we have been incredibly fortunate to work with you, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so we can have a discussion here. There we go. So we'd love to start by, if you could just describe to us a bit what brought you to this project, what encouraged you to take an interest in it and to support this work.
So there are a couple of reasons why I was very interested in this, and I'd like to add just one thing to your description. I was a former special education teacher a long, long, long time ago in rural Georgia along the Georgia-Florida state line. And at that time, I wasn't all that interested in writing. I was interested in reading because that was and math, that was the primary focus with the students that I was working with. But over time, became more and more interested in writing. And one of the things that in national surveys that we've noticed in the US, but also outside the US, is that students are not writing very often at the secondary level, really at any level, once you get past the primary grades. And there's not a lot of teaching going on. And also when we've asked teachers about the programs that they use, and these are teachers randomly selected from across the US, only about 1/3 of teachers are saying that they have kind of an organized approach to teaching writing. They kind of do it on their own. And being a teacher in the past, I know how hard that is because one, often you don't get a lot of preparation to teach writing in your university programs. And you may get some in terms of, in service with your schools, but that differs from place to place. And so you're kind of left to rely on your own resources to build what you do. And given the time constraints, if you're a secondary teacher, that means you're doing this after hours, so to speak. So having resources that are available, that are flexible, I think is particularly important if writing is to resume its proper place in the secondary writing curriculum, where it's just not as common as once was, say as when I was in school, in high school, some long, 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 long time ago.
No, I agree. And I would say even since I was in school, and even since I was teaching, I feel there's been a less of an emphasis on writing. I think, there's lots of reasons for that, but with high stake testing, it's just not, it has not been valued the way that reading comprehension has been valued. And it's a shame because, as I'm sure you can explain, it supports reading comprehension so well. So yeah, so I'm curious, given your background, what brought you to the pathway in particular?
Well, I was trying to remember how this initially started, and I think Phil contacted me. He was working with a group called Quill that I was particularly interested in because I think they have developed some very interesting sentence construction procedures that are online and at least to individual teachers are free. I always like this free part. And we started talking and I liked the goals that you guys were looking at in terms of it being available. It is flexibility in terms of not just having something that you follow step by step, but that you can make decisions of what you might draw upon based upon your students' needs and where they're at in terms of both reading and writing. And my own personal feeling is that the more that's available for teachers to draw on, that's well designed and easily available, the better it is for the kids that we work with.
Absolutely. Okay, well, speaking of the past, kind of coming to the future, you know that you're going to get this question. You must get this question in every conversation you have. With the rise of AI and tools like ChatGPT, how are you thinking about how teachers should be teaching writing differently, if at all, and how they might be integrating or not integrating AI into their instruction?
Initially, the reaction amongst folks in my side of the science field, which would be, kind of the social science side of things, was all of a sudden, you had a software system that could write for you. And it was like the sky was falling, every piece of it. And I found that interesting because, we've been involved with AI for a while. Maybe it couldn't write like this, but in our personal lives with Siri and other kinds of things, AI has become integral to it. And eventually this was going to happen. And I think the most important thing to think about in this is kind of two sides. And the pathway is addressing one side of that. And that is how teachers can use AI in ways that are beneficial for improving the instruction that they provide. And so, as an example of this, I was meeting with a teacher in Texas a couple of months ago, and she was telling me about, she wants to share with her kids miscues that they've made in their writing, but she's really reluctant of putting up a paper with a kid's name on it or without the name on it. So what
Mhm.
she did was she had AI generate a piece with the same kind of miscues in it. And then, that served as a discussion point of how that influenced meaning and what the kid was writing, how it might distract from other people's view of that writing, etc. But I've also talked to other teachers and kind of doing like what you're doing is AI becomes part of helping you improve what your lesson is. And I think increasingly, given the short amount of time teachers have, we're going to see teachers drawing upon that and making decisions about what to use. Now, the flip side of that is obviously using AI for writing. And I think this gets a little bit more complicated because on the one hand, AI could replace us as writers. And, you see this kind of concern within the entertainment industry where there's a move to, keep humans writing
Right.
stories, plays, movies, etc.
Yeah.
And I think we also need to have some concern on that end in terms of what we do. And I'll say a couple of reasons why that is the case to kind of keep it short. One is that writing is a thinking tool. So what's the advantage of writing? It helps you think about either what's in your head, if that's where you're at, what you're learning in a classroom about what you're reading. When you write about something, there's a lot of different things that you do, but one of them is, if you're reading something, you make decisions when you write about it about what's important. So you have to make that decision. Your writing may help organize information in your writing. As you write, you start integrating information that you already hold in your head with the information that you're looking at. As you're actually crafting a sentence, sometimes that thought is fuzzy about what you're reading or about what you're learning or about what you're thinking. But as you craft that sentence, if you're successful at it, you have to come to greater clarity on that. And sometimes that leads to new insights. And when you write and you're writing about information, you end up having a more personal relationship with that. And so you can see where there might be a downside, or there will be a downside if a machine writes for you or a software program writes for you. Those kind of mental activities are not going to occur. So we have to, it's not that AI is going to go away. It's
Mhm.
here. So we have to think about how we want to master this and how we use it in ways that are productive to make our writing better, but not to lose the thinking aspects that go into writing that are so powerful in terms of helping us remember and understand what we read and what we learn in the classroom. Um, the other point I would make here, and I'll leave it at this, is that in some ways, as we use AI more commonly in our writing over time, we have to become better managers of the writing process. We not only have to manage our own writing, but we have to manage how AI is going to work with us on this. And quite frankly, if you're not very competent in terms of your writing, that is harder to do. And so just because AI can write for you when you want to write for yourself doesn't make all the other things go away.
Mhm.
And I said that was the last one, but I'll give one more. Um, there's a lot of things that we do in writing that AI can't do for us. So for example, I mentioned to you earlier that I probably have COVID today. My wife has it, but I have a very mild case. But let's say that I had a psychological issue or a physical issue that I was dealing with. There's increasing research that writing about your problems can help you do better.
Mhm.
Well, a machine can't write about your problems and help you do better.
Mhm.
If you're trying to explore who you are or keep track of who you are, like in a diary, a machine can't do that for you. So there are some things that machines can do for us in terms of our purposes for writing. I could go on this, but I'll leave it at those two examples. And there's other things that it cannot do for us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm so glad you brought up that point too, because I think, when we focus on teaching writing, we tend to focus more on the informational and argumentative writing, but writing is so much bigger than that, right? And it affects every part of our life, and it's so key to healing and to processing and all of that. So I love that. I wanted to ask you one follow-up. Let me just look at my notes. You're saying that writing is a thinking tool. I just wanted to highlight that point, that I think if we think of writing as a thinking tool and stop thinking of it as about writing, then a lot of these questions would cease to be so important, right? Because you're never going to stop teaching students to think. You're never going to stop wanting students to practice thinking in your classroom. And so whatever happens with technology, that I think will always be, I think we can say that will always be around. So I love that piece as well. And I think sometimes, like for us, we're called the writing pathway. It would be hard to call it, the writing and thinking pathway. That's not very catchy. But I think, I wish people would have, and I hope people start to have, a more expansive view of what writing is. It's not just this separate thing that we do. It's so integrated in thinking, in reading, and understanding. It's very much human and part of all of that. So anyway, that was more of a comment than a question. Okay. Well, sort of related to this, I do really love this question, and someone else asked me about this as well. What do you feel about the 5-paragraph essay? And you can talk about ChatGPT, but you also don't have to. I mean, just where do you kind of stand
Okay.
on the
So-
5-paragraph essay?
So I'm all about flexibility. But on the other hand, how do you get to where you can be flexible in writing? And so, on the one hand, you had this kind of 5-paragraph essay as being a way of, kind of like an introduction, 3 bodies, and a conclusion. And, clearly for some kinds of writing that will do the job. It's an organizational structure. And that's basically all it is. In the work that we do, let's say I'm going to use it with a younger kid. Let's say a child in 2nd grade. As they're planning, we might encourage them, if they're, trying to present a point of view, to generate multiple points of view, but then to make a decision about which, are the best ones, and make a minimum of 3. It could be 2, it could be 4, it could be 5. It's somewhat arbitrary in terms of what gets the job done. But what we're doing is presenting a structure as an initial jumping off place. And unfortunately, I think what happened with the 5-paragraph essay is it's like an initial structure and it becomes stuck in time, right? So it's like a box, that you build for yourself, and all of a sudden you're closed in the box.
Right.
And so you're not using this, you're stuck in that box for this year, next year, the year after, and that's not progress as a writer. So where it may be useful as kind of an initial organizational structure, what we want students to do as they're learning it is go beyond it. It may be sometimes, maybe 2 paragraphs gets what you want done. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15. Maybe you look for other ways of structuring this. But that's where creativity comes in often, is we have structures that we then, like genre structures as an example, that we then modify in various ways to meet our writing purposes and our intentions. And so I'm never going to say you want to abandon structure, but if you get stuck in structure, it's not to your kid's best advantage over time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things I've always not understood is why we have such a sense with writing, maybe because of creative writing, that we have this resistance to structures, whereas with any other skill that's hard to learn, music or art, right? That's what you do. You first learn some very foundational structures that you stick to in a pretty rigid way, and you practice them over and over until you master them. And then once you master them, then you can be Picasso and do Guernica and do all sorts of crazy things. But almost always, right, the pathway starts with some of that, mastering those foundational structures.
Right, and I'm in favor of mastering, becoming, knowing the structures that represent a particular genre. So if we took persuasive writing and you think about it within the West and you think about it within the East. So in the US, we basically follow a model where we're very direct about what, the opinion we want to put forward. If we think about this opinion or the premise that we want to put forward, And then we marshal arguments to support that and evidence and etc. Without that, you wouldn't recognize this as being an argument. Now, that doesn't mean that we might not stick into their aspects of narrative to kind of illustrate a particular point. If you go to the East, in China, over 3,000 years, they haven't used that direct structure up until English became a foreign language that they're mastering. They often do not say what their premise is. It kind of goes around it. It may never directly state it. Sometimes it'll directly state the obvious, and they have these various structures that evolved over a 2,000 to 3,000 year period for how you present this. Now, as the two cultures meet, they've been a little bit more, consistent about using structures from the West because of English as a foreign language, where we've been less, we've been kind of more resistant to using or applying the approaches they have. But I think it would be an interesting take if you look at this, if you're writing an argument and you write it from kind of, in different ways, and then look at, for your audience, what best works, and for your intention, what best works. And so, but you can't do that if you're not familiar with the structures.
Right.
That's
And if
an
you don't have
impossibility.
one of them, at least, right? It's just like learning a language. You first got to learn your own language before you can learn others.
Well, and in this case, you could take something like this indirect approach and apply it to any language. But, it's helpful if you have a little bit of practice doing it. We learn through practice. I'd love to say that all you need to do is see something once and you're done, but that's usually not the case for most of us.
Right. I love that. And I just have to, I'm every now and then seeing the chat, and my former principal, Kirsten Larson, is here, which is just such an honor to have you here. And I know Kirsten will appreciate it. I used to teach Things Fall Apart when I taught at Marble Hill. And one of the things I loved in that book is they talked about exactly what you described, Steve, which is that way of making an argument where you basically beat around the bush, and the more you beat around the bush, the more effective your argument is. And I love talking about that with students. They're always like, what? How could that be? And it's like, yeah, there's different ways of making an argument. Okay. We are, of course, I didn't get to many of these questions. Let me look for which one we want to do next. And then we want to make sure to have time for audience questions. Okay. So the science of reading is having its very long overdue moment, which is wonderful. What do you think we've been missing or getting wrong about the science of teaching writing?
Well, so one, we don't, within the writing field, we don't talk as much about the science of writing as we do the science of reading. And I'm going to give kind of a slightly different view on this. When I think of science, if you mention the science of reading, for some people, that's interpreted as meaning phonics. For other people, it might mean the big five from the National Institute of Child Human and Development Report in 2000: comprehension, vocabulary, fluency, phonics, and phonological awareness. I kind of see this as a broader thing. It's the study of, the systematic, empirical, but that could include qualitative studies that look at meaning that reading has for people, of science in a broader sense. And I see writing in the same way. So I don't necessarily see it as the science of writing is, these are the procedures that we have some evidence that are effective. I think we have to have a good understanding of how writing operates, what's involved when you write, both from the context or the communities within which you're writing, but also in terms of the kind of knowledge that you need to bring to the task, the cognitive operations, your motivational aspects, etc., and then how writing develops over time. And so, I think all of those are important, and we have done that in science. We just haven't been in writing. We just haven't been as vocal about it as the folks in reading. And maybe that's good in a way because less interpretation, misinterpretation is applied. But eventually, I suspect we'll be doing the same thing. And, there's positives to that and there's negatives.
For sure. Okay. So we've got about 5 more minutes for our questions, and I'm gonna squeeze this one in because as a former English teacher, I really love this question. And this is a question I would say I get asked the most when people are looking at the pathway. The thing that they ask, can it help me with this? Is this, which is getting students to write analysis. So the problem, I can speak from my own experience, students tend to be, it's not too hard to get them to identify evidence that supports a claim. It's not too hard for them to explain the evidence, but when it gets to the point of actually explaining how that evidence supports their claim and doing that analytical so what piece, they really struggle. And so I'm curious what your response would be to teachers who are working on that with students.
Well, so I think one of the things that is often overlooked is that sometimes it's hard to step outside of your own shoes, right?
Mm.
So, if you have we see this all the time, and particularly now, if you have a particular point of view, let's say on a presidential candidate, and, without naming either of the two, it's sometimes, you feel towards this candidate in a particular way, and you may be able to articulate why you like this particular candidate, but you often don't analyze that and the assumptions underlying it very carefully. When you're forced to do that with another person in a respectful way,
Mm.
then sometimes that can lead, not immediately, to a change in your perception, but it forces you to think about it versus kind of hiding it away and not dealing with it. And I think that same principle applies in writing, and that is dialogue, that occurs either before or after. And this can be done with really young kids. We just had a study in Turkey that we did where we had kids present a point of view on something, and then they had a small group that they shared their paper with, and in a structured way, the group gave feedback and suggestions related to the points made
Mm.
by the author of that piece. They did this with each other, and also ways of improving writing, so that they got at both the analytical end and the other. But I want to be really frank, structuring that is particularly important with the idea of the types of questions that you want students to focus in on. If it's a free-for-all, it might work some of the time, but it's not going to work a number of the times. And I've unfortunately had that experience through my own stupidity.
Same. No, I really love that response because I feel like you've touched on, I just wrote down 3 things that I feel like I see a lot in your work and which I always appreciate the reminder to think about, which are the importance of audience, the importance of writing for an authentic audience, and then really connected to all of that, the fact that we write in community, that writing is a communication and it's something we do with others and to connect and to persuade others. And so I love the idea of thinking about, even I'm thinking also with the pathway, how we can do more to incorporate that, because I think so to connect it back to analysis, I think when students are writing for an authentic purpose and an authentic audience, their need to have solid and persuasive analysis is authentic, as opposed to my teacher says I have to have a sentence that checks the box for analysis. And I can see how just being more thoughtful about how those writing prompts and the writing that they're doing meets those needs, the more likely you're going to get real analysis because they actually care about making their point.
Well, if nobody's going to read what you say, then is it all that important that you think very
Right.
deeply about the
Right.
points that you're putting forward? But if you've got to share those either in a small group or more publicly, then you're going to take much more care in terms
Right.
of how you approach that. And I don't mean to present that in a negative light. We want kids to be able to discuss in respectful ways their ideas, because I think that helps them grow over time. And that's really a value of writing, in my opinion.
So that is a perfect lead up to my last question, which I debated whether to put in here, but I think it's important. And that is that it is an election year. What do you think writing and teaching writing has to do with democracy?
Well, so a number of things. One is that all you have to do is look around you. If you're an adult in this election year, whether you use social media, whether you use, read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal to take, kind of reasoned sides of the street, or you look at other sources, there's a lot of writing going on trying to convince you one way or the other.
Mm.
And, I think one of the things that's really helpful when you have to put forward an opinion and you have to think about your audience it also helps you think about what others write as well. And I'm a real fan of reading with a writer's eye, but with an extension of that. And that is, you might take a piece at the high school level that you look at that say appeared in, say, the New York Times on the same topic, and also in the Wall Street Journal that may be looking at the same topic, and you analyze that to think about what the writer was trying to do, how they're trying to influence you, how they bring evidence to bear, and compare that across. And what you'll often see is they're using similar strategies, but they're starting from a different assumption basis. And then I think the step that's often missing when we read with a writer's eye is then you take what you've learned and you apply it in something that you write, and then you share with other people and get feedback on. So it comes around and goes around, as you say, and sometimes we don't take the time to do that, but I think the writing part of that really helps us better understand what's going on.
Yeah. Especially since it helps us think, right? That's the thinking it through.
Well, it's going to help you clarify your viewpoints, but now you have a model and you've thought about different ways of going about this. And I don't want to de-emphasize the importance role of having good models that you analyze, and then that you use that when in various ways when you write. The first thing I ever wrote professionally, I went to what I thought was a top journal in the field. I found something that was similar for that, and then that gave me a model from which to write. I don't need to do that, 45 years later, but on the other hand, boy, it sure helped getting started, because I was a complete novice writing for academic audiences.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've thought a lot about this model piece in the pathway, because for the informational and persuasive argumentative units, you can go in as I demoed and create a model that's at the level that your students need to be at. I found it very hard I taught high school English, and so often I felt like what I was asking them to do was literary analysis. And if I looked for models of literary analysis, it was stuff written at the graduate level that was way, way beyond them. And so, if I had had a tool like this to be able to go in there and say, I need a model that's written at a 7th grade level about the Great Gatsby, or about, whatever it was, it would have been so valuable. And that said, in the creative writing parts of the pathway, so we do cover fictional writing and personal narrative writing, we felt there that it didn't make sense to have the AI create the model, because with creative writing, you want the model to be the real thing, like the real short story. And to your point earlier about what AI can and can't do, it didn't make sense to have that be something that the AI was generating. That's where you really do want to bring students to real literature and to real examples. But yeah, just interesting to think about
But
those
having
models.
models that you can see yourself doing. So in a sense, with the example I gave, I saw that as a model that I could emulate, I could
Right.
do. When we first started working with really young kids, we would have, something that was written by a professional author. And we realized that kids couldn't achieve that. So we started using stuff that kids wrote. We didn't have AI at the time. And we juiced it up a little bit, right?
Right.
We took the miscues out of it, and we made it a
Right.
little bit cleaner and stuff. But then they have something that's within their capabilities to achieve.
Right.
That's a lot easier than looking at something that's a model that you're never going to be able to do, in the next week.
Right. It has to be attainable. It has to
Yeah.
feel doable to kids. Yeah, and breaking it down. Absolutely. Okay, we are running out of time. So we are going to open it up to questions, and let's see. Okay, so we do have, I didn't think about whether we should do the questions sent ahead. I'm going to do 2 of the questions sent ahead because they were sent ahead, and then we'll go to the live questions. Okay.
Okay.
So just thinking out loud there. Okay. So we did get a question about how teaching writing with the pathway in general supports, or how it should work with multilingual learners, as well as in science classrooms. And I thought those were kind of interesting cases that we don't always talk about with writing. So yeah, curious what your thoughts are about teaching writing with multilingual
I'm going to do the easier question, what I think is the easier question first, okay?
Okay.
And that is using it in a content area classroom. So think about something like writing an argument or writing an informational piece. we've done some surveys where we've asked teachers about their use of writing, and we might be looking at 30 or 40 different kinds of activities in science and how frequently teachers use those activities. We've also taken a look at the evidence base that exists when teachers employ, in research studies, various activities, and whether instruction goes on or doesn't. Now, on a positive end, is like if you ask students to write a summary of something that maybe they're working on in science, or an analysis in some way, there's usually a positive benefit without instruction. But if you want to juice that up, you basically model and teach students how to do that. And that's where something like the pathway would come in. If I'm going to write an argument, then I may get more out of this if I integrate that teaching in with analyzing that science material. So, I'm not saying that just having students write about something in science can't be beneficial for many of the students in your classroom, maybe not all, because nothing is ever effective with every single student, but you get better results, at least from, what the science has to say about this, by teaching kids or providing them with instruction, hints, practice in doing so, and, not doing it one time.
Yeah.
Usually if you do it one time, what you get is very minimal. The issue with multilingual learners is a really tough one. We're doing a meta-analysis right now, and we located a total in writing of 20 studies. If you count single participant design studies, 5. And all of those studies basically do kind of traditional writing stuff. Now, we haven't, looked at the effects of those, but we do know from a meta-analysis we've done in reading, when you do traditional stuff with kids who are learning, say, English as the language of instruction, and their home language is something different than that, and they're still mastering it, it can be a real challenge in terms of getting much of a results. The effect sizes are quite small, to be honest, and quite, quite concerning. So, just a couple of, these are going to be non-scientific suggestions, but a couple of suggestions is that, letting kids use both their, I'm going to use the term native language here. There's all this disagreement about the terms you use, so please bear with me. I don't mean anything mean or bad by using a particular term, but if students use both their native language and the language of instruction as they write, as kind of a way to bridge the gap, that can be very helpful. However, there are some caveats here. How much transfer you get on that, or value that you get out of that, depends upon, how well you write in your native language and how well you're writing in your language of instruction. And so, the assumption when we first moved to Arizona, we thought, oh, we have a lot of kids who come from Hispanic households, and they will have done a lot of writing in Spanish, and that didn't end up being the case. Their writing in Spanish was, even though they were learning English as a school language, they were pretty similar to what they wrote in English. So the benefits from writing to Spanish were not as strong. However, you can teach kids process that can transfer quite easily from one language to another, like how to plan,
Right.
how to revise. So, the language part's a little bit more difficult, but the process part can be applied a lot more easily. And so I think that would be one good point to concentrate on in terms of doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like this is an area where hopefully AI can be helpful with, translation. It makes it just so much easier.
Well, I get emails from places I can't read the language, and all of a sudden I click on the thing and I can read what's there.
Right.
So
That's
yeah,
incredible.
this is going to provide a lot of tools for a lot of different kids that we did not have so easily available in the past.
Yeah. It's exciting. Okay. So we have a question from Janique, I hope I'm saying that right, Carrot Gaffney, which is, let me do answer live. How do we know that the AI is picking out the most important aspect of the text? So
Okay, we don't. I mean, you know, honestly, that's an evaluation, right, that you have to make. And so, you know, let me try this a little differently on this response. So we've conducted two studies taking a look at comparing um, uh, feedback from different versions of, you know, say like ChatGPT, because they keep evolving. And we had trained doctoral students who had been writing teachers before, who provided feedback that would be given to students. So we didn't have any students. These were samples we collected in a large study in California with social studies teachers. And we also did the same thing with ChatGPT.
Mhm.
And then we evaluated that feedback on multiple criteria, you know, like how positive it was, how constructive it was, um, you know, whether or not it was correct, etc. But those are human decisions, right? That we make. And so what we found was that humans were slightly better, not like tons better than ChatGPT on all but one factor. And it, you know, the differences though were pretty small.
Mhm.
And as ChatGPT gets better at doing this, and we get better at programming, you know, what we're asking it to do, then it'll become better as well. Now, if you ask me, and I had this conversation with an author who saw some of the feedback that was provided by humans and ChatGPT, you could probably say neither one were super great. Um, you know, the feedback could be better in all instances. So, you know, it's not like having an editorial assistant working with a professional author giving
Right.
it, you know, the feedback that we give when we're in the classroom. And we're in, you know, we've got 5 classes or 6 classes and we've got 120 students. It's constrained by
Mhm.
those times. We might be able to give better, but, you know, quite honestly, when I used to say, in workshops I do, we need to double the amount of time students write in school and we provide instruction. Now, that's outrageous, right? Because I don't know how much time you're devoting to this or how much time for instruction you're devoting. But I can tell you what the pushback was every time. And it didn't really come from teachers, it came from administrators. Teachers don't have time to do this because they need to get feedback on every paper. And
Mhm.
my thought was, well, maybe you don't need to give feedback on every paper. Peers can give feedback to each other. Students can give themselves feedback. And we're starting to have, you know, software program that can give
Yeah.
feedback. We've just completed a meta-analysis looking at high school, middle, high school, and college age people on algorithm-based feedback, computer-based feedback. And it had a reasonably strong effect.
Mhm.
You know, about a third of a standard deviation or about a 0.35 effect size. That's not overwhelming,
Yeah.
but it's not bad either, and that's going to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And you mentioned Quill before. I came to teaching that from Quill, and I think what they're doing with feedback is really kind of amazing and saves teachers an enormous amount of time. I'm just thinking about Janique's question, which is about the picking out aspects of the text. I think she's thinking about when we generate those mentor paragraphs, for example, and it's about, let's say, A Long Walk to Water. How do we trust that the AI is picking out the most important aspects? And I think I just want to make the point. That's why I feel so positive about the fact that our tool is teacher facing. So it's not like we're generating this mentor text and boom, it's going to a student. You're the teacher is the intermediary and can go, you know what, that's actually not what I would emphasize. But what I would hope is that because the AI generated it, it saves you, I mean, could be an hour, right, of figuring out what you want the paragraph to look like and writing it yourself. And now it's a matter of just going in there and changing the quote that it pulled, or checking that it actually is the quote from the text.
Well, I would
So
add a slightly
yeah.
different perspective on that as well, and that is when we're introducing like a genre with kids, we'll start with text that we think is well written. Like you said, you can, you know, you can pare it down or juice it up a little bit depending on what the machine does. But then once students start talking about, you know, what makes this, they think a good argument, and they'll bring up all kinds of things from, you know, the evidence is really good to, you know, it was easy to read the sentences. There'll be a lot of things,
Right.
you know, that they'll bring up. But then what we do is we also start asking to analyze text that doesn't look so good. And they enjoy that, you know, it's fun
They
picking
do.
things apart. And it also can be fun picking AI apart as part of it,
Mm-hmm.
is to find what's not, you know, AI generated this. What do you think isn't working here? That can be a valuable resource as well in terms of helping students be critical and develop criteria for evaluating text that they're reading and that they'll produce.
Absolutely. Okay, we are getting close to the end. Okay. Let me just pull up the slides again. So just to close with some next steps for everyone, please do go ahead and create your free Pathway account. The link is there, and I'll put that in the chat as well. We also have 2 Getting Started webinars coming up, and the link to those will also be in the chat. And then we have this fun thing, which is that we're doing a little raffle. So if you send us a screenshot or a screen recording of an activity that you created with the Pathway, and a little blurb about what you did and why you did it, how you used it, and email it to us with the subject line Pathway Raffle Submission by October 15th. We're going to have 3 lucky winners with a $25 Amazon gift card. And we would just really love to see how folks are using the Pathway. And with that, we have just a few minutes. You know what? I think we could take one more question. What do you think, Steve?
That would be fine. And
Okay.
let me end by saying thank you to those who logged on today. You know, I really do like this program, so I want to put a positive plug in.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. We are so grateful that you took the time to be with us here today. Let's see. There was a question about generating with the handout. Let's see. You know what? I'm just going to pull back for 1 second. Okay, so we had a question from Carol. How can this AI writing tool help teachers in low-performing school districts with feedback and improved writing prompts?
Okay, so, you know, one of the challenges with the feedback in that we've experienced is that, you know, what goes in determines the quality of what you get back. And so if you are going to use, you know, something like ChatGPT for feedback, then one of the things that you want to be sure is that you play around with it a little bit, make sure that you get what you want. You know, I'm not going to quite answer your question. I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way on the feedback. You know, sometimes we look at feedback as we give it and then somebody's supposed to do something with it. I think probably the most important thing is that when you get feedback, whether it's from a teacher, a peer, or a machine, that we want students to think about that feedback and what their goals for writing are. So for students who find writing challenging, particularly, let's say in a low performing school, one of the things that I think is particularly important is that, you know, they have a plan at the start. So I'm starting on the other end with this, that if you don't know what you're trying to do, then either evaluating your own writing or considering feedback from others makes it a little difficult. So we always have students start with, you know, if there's a goal by the teacher or goals by the teacher, identifying those and goals that you would like to add to that for your own writing as a student. But then when they get feedback from people, the first thing we want them to do is think about this in relationship to your goals. You own this piece, okay? This is your writing. And then will this piece help you here? And sometimes we find, particularly if it's peer feedback, that we do some instruction around this where we have students give peer feedback together. And they always start with, I'm gonna use 3 again, with 3 positive things that I liked about your writing, and they share those. And then it's like a conversation, but it takes some practice to get there. You know, I didn't quite understand what was happening here. Can you tell me more about that? And then that leads the writer to think about whether they need to do something there. But I think when we think about feedback, wherever it comes from, we want to think about this as a 2-way dance. That, you know, just because I get it doesn't mean I use it. I have to make a decision about whether it will help me in terms of the goals that I've set for this writing. So slightly different response, but I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love ending with student ownership, right? They need to own their own, it's their writing, and when they own it, they get to make those decisions. So I love that. Okay, it is 4 o'clock. Oh, it's our time. Steve, thank you so much. We're so grateful. I think, I can see a little bit in the chat when I was able to peek over there. It has been very active. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today.
And thank you for asking me, and you have a good afternoon, okay?
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for joining us.